This is going to kind of be a very rapid talk because I'm fitting a lot of information into a very short space. So we're going to be talking about surviving the digital world war, and I'll get a little bit into what that is, encapsulated within security in the modern era. So real quick, who am I? And I promise you this isn't just a self-aggrandizement, this actually has a purpose. So I am an information technology professional. My day job is for a video game company, yeah. And then I also write for Nordic APIs. And when I have time, I'm a musician, although that, obviously, professional life. So why is all of this important? Well, to answer that question, I'm actually going to ask you guys a question. Who are you? Okay. So who is the audience? Fundamentally, we know some data. We know your personal data. Anyone who registered for this, we have a whole bunch of data from you, and we also have Facebook profiles, Twitter, anyone who's tweeted at Nordic APIs, hashtag, all that. We can find out some data about you. So on your Facebook, we obviously can find your name, some interests. I know I'm guilty of listing my favorite books, favorite movies, things like that. We also have your family connections. Unfortunately, we often list who our father, mother, brother, sister, cousin, cousin's friend, cousin's dog, etc. All that is listed pretty freely. Again, if you registered for this, we have some professional data. We know who your employers are. We know some educational details some of the time. We know publications you've been in. For me, for instance, you can find my Nordic API stuff as well as the stuff that I do for my other employer. And we have some educational things. So if you're like me and have a LinkedIn, we know your degree. We kind of know your grades. If you graduated cum laude, then you obviously didn't get straight Fs. And we know some licensing agencies. Again, if you're like me and have a business card, you probably have alphabet soup with CCNA, MCITP, so forth, so forth. So we know a lot of that data. But here's kind of a loop that people get thrown for. That's not actually who you are online. Those data points are data points that we often consider who we are, but that is who you are offline. As someone who deals a lot with hacking for part of my work, and specifically in terms of DDoS and phishing, the criminals don't really care about that. What they care about is your data. When you're online, you are entirely your data. We don't care who your sister is. We don't care where you went to work. We don't care what your favorite book is. None of that matters. What matters is all the data that you push through the microservices, the APIs, the regular, classic services, web services, all of that. That is who you functionally are. So let's talk a little bit about that data. We have your financial data. I have Apple Pay, okay? This is a fundamentally insecure method of payment. Do not bite that bullet. Anything that uses NFC or any kind of communication like that. Felica is another big one in Asia. I travel a lot through Asia, and I can tell you anyone with the proper reader that sits out of a turnstile in Japan can get your account balance if they have the right credentials. Really, really easy. So that data, easy to get, very, very valuable. Personal data. This is not your names. This is not your family. This is your personally identifiable information of who you are in terms of locational on the internet. This device that I'm using right now has a MAC address. All of your phones have a MAC address. All of your phones have specific addresses attached to them defining hardware. All of that personal data is akin to walking up to a stranger when you go to the central, I came from Strubaya, Tibanen, and that's essentially like going up to someone in the subway and saying, hey, I live here. Come see me sometime. That's what you're doing every time you connect to your device outside of a VPN or a secure network. You're essentially saying, this is who I am. Come get me, big boy. Your governmental data. Obviously, if you can't tell from my accent, I'm from the West Coast of the United States. But one of the big problems that we have in the US and is starting to become a problem in certain European countries is the wireless transmission of governmental data, such as your tax identification numbers, social security numbers, your billing addresses, any security clearances. I'll get this out of the way to begin with. I do have a security clearance for the United States government from work I did previously. That unfortunately makes me a target in some circles. And so that kind of stuff is something I would say in this kind of situation where most of you have been vetted, but I certainly would not walk out in the middle of the streets at 11 o'clock at night and say, hey, I have a security clearance, secret. Come talk to me, I'm cool. okay? That puts a target on your back. Wage data. Anytime you have any employee ID number, tax number, that is extremely valuable information. Not only because from a hacking perspective, that lets me know who you are and how valuable you are, that also lets me know how to hurt you the worst. If I disagree with your politics, I have your wage number, I have your tax number, I could get you into a lot of trouble. I could fake tax information. I can send in a lot of invoices with your tax number, and all of a sudden by the end of the year, you have $9,000 in unpaid taxes that you don't have the money from. So you can't pay the taxes. So all of this, why is that important? Well, we are fundamentally in a world war. And when I say world war, I literally mean world war. World War I, World War II, Napoleonic conflict, whole thing, just full blast world war. And just like a world war, in terms of traditional munitions, we have victims, we have attackers, combatants, we have a whole bunch of things that we need to talk about. So let's go through that real fast. So what do I mean when I say World War API? Well, every system that connects to the internet funnels all this data we've been talking about. And just like when Dresden was bombed, or the Battle of Britain happened, or any of the other conflicts throughout history, the victims are almost never the people with guns. Those are the people shooting back. The victims are the civilians that are caught in the crossfire. This has happened in Syria, this happened in World War II, this has happened in every conflict since the beginning of time, going all the way back to ancient times. Unfortunately, if you have data online, you are a potential victim. Okay, you're also a potential combatant, which we'll get to in a few minutes. But real quick, you need to understand that you are a potential victim. All of the people that use your services are potential victims, and all of the people who depend on those services are potential victims. And just as with World War I, everyone had their fancy weapons and they were extremely excited to use them on each other, same thing is happening in the API space. Never before have we had the kind of technology where a single, what we call a script kiddie, some 16-year-old kid who's high on the horse thinks he's gonna have a good time, downloads something like LOIC or Mirai, which was just implicated in a huge hacking incident that took out the East Coast of the United States internet for Netflix, Hulu, Amazon. We've never had that before. It's essentially like having every citizen in the United States with an M1 Abrams tank, which, contrary to the common meme, that's not true. We're not all that weapon happy. So, but just imagine everyone here having an M1 Abrams, and that's essentially the kind of access we have to tools like never before. So, with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about who the enemy is. Now, when I say enemy, I'm not taking any political stance here. I'm not going to tell you who I'm voting for in the election. I'm not going to tell you who I support in terms of political groups. When I say enemy, this is strictly limited to combatants. These are the people you're going to have to deal with in terms of security. It's separated broadly into three groups. First, you have your non-affiliated groups. These are hacker groups or individuals with a bone to pick. These three names, if anyone is into security, it probably will come very, very much to the forefront. Lizard Squad is famous for the Xbox Live and PlayStation Network Christmas hacks, took down a whole bunch of servers. They also single-handedly, well, not single-handedly, I should say, they partnered with Anonops, which is an offshoot of LulzSec, to take down the North Korean internet countrywide, all 20 users. But that was a significant attack. That's the kind of war we're talking about here. Shadow Crew is kind of an interesting thing. The government likes to downplay the official stats because this is a huge deal. But they had, at its height, approximately 4,000 users, either active or older accounts, with $4 million in estimated credit theft. And this was from hacking the APIs, using near-field technology to get credit cards when people did the touch and pay. And this has been going on for years. That's actually the biggest European component. If I was doing this talk in the States, people would mostly know LulzSec. Anyone who's into security here probably knows Shadow Crew. The next step is terror groups. Terror groups are a little bit weird. Sometimes they're political, sometimes they're just to do terror. People like to break stuff, people like to kill people. That's just the way humanity is on one half of the human brain. So you have cyber terrorist groups, you have religious groups like Aum Shinrikyo, which is a Japanese religious group that became a left. They committed a sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway. They've also been implicated in corporate terrorism. ISIS, obviously, don't have to go into ISIS/Daesh. And the Zapatistas, which is a Mexican revolutionary group, which is actually from my family's area of Mexico, Chiapas, or Chiapas, depending on your accent. And then the next level is state and nation. Now, this is fundamentally state and nation. I'm not playing a game here. This is Russia, United States, France, Germany, all the states, and then nations such as the nation of Palestine. Other groups like the Kurdish Defense Force, or whatever you want to call them, the Kurdish people, consider themselves to be a nation, and they have their own cyber warfare. Again, not taking a political stance here, I'm just stating who your people, who your issues are going to be. So what do they care about? I like to summarize this by 4 simple letters, 5, or vive, however you want to pronounce it. So the first thing is determined value. The enemy cares about your specific determined value. This is not your actual value. You might be a millionaire, but if all you have in your bank is $100, your determined value is $100. That is what your determined value is. Obfuscation of your resources, hiding resources, not letting people know what you actually have is key to this. Internal reasoning. Why specifically would a group like LulzSec attack PSN? Quite simply for the lulz. Okay, LOL, lulz. They just did it because it was funny. Christmas morning, you get up, people all over the country, all over the world have bought PlayStation 4s, all excited, PlayStation 3s, Xboxes. You turn it on, network not found. Hilarious, guys. V, vulnerability. Okay, I will tell you right now, you are much more likely to be robbed if you have the, daddy Warbucks look and you have money hanging out of your pocket, walking down the street in the middle of the night, than you are staying at home. Same thing with APIs. If your API connects to fiscal resources and you're not obfuscating that, that is a huge problem, okay? Vulnerability is a big part of it. And effort. If I'm gonna have to take an hour to get $100, I'm not gonna do it. That might sound crazy because $100 an hour is great, but if I can attack another target in 10 minutes and get a $10,000 payoff in the long run, I'm gonna do that, hands down, every single time. So consider that as we keep going. So what are their motivations? I'm not going to get too deep into this data because there's a little bit of screwiness with it. The reasoning broadly broken down is 6-7% cybercrime, 20.8 hacktivism, so on and so on. This data is not actually usable in my mind because you cannot lump economic cybercrime into just the economic purposes. Economic cybercrime also happens for hacktivism. You can take down people you disagree with. It also happens for corporations. You disagree with a corporation. There you go. So who are the victims? I've talked a little bit about this. I'm just going to go through this real fast. Individuals, we had situations like the fappening, the snapping. These were breaks in security that leaked nude photos of celebrities and normal people like you and me. Identity theft is a big part of that. Again, you are valuable. Your data is inherently valuable. Internet services. We've had people, and we're going to have people from internet services that we use every day. I know Airbnb. I'm actually staying here for a couple days after this to visit Stockholm with my wife, and I'm using an Airbnb. I have my credit card stored on that platform. Someone gets into that platform, something happens to security, although I don't think that would happen, I am faced with a real significant issue. State resources, data centers, believe it or not, nuclear power generators. The Iranian nuclear program has a worm that was supposedly developed by the FBI and CIA in conjunction with the NSA that has completely destroyed their abilities to spin up their reactors with level power. That's a big problem, and that's not just Iranian, that's many other countries have that problem. So who's the main target? We've talked about victims, but the fundamental issue here is you are the target, okay? When people bomb cities, the victims are the people in the cities, the target is the city. When people break into these systems, the targets are the systems themselves and the victims are your users. As the provider for these APIs and these web services, it is upon you to ensure this is not a problem, okay? So the weapons of war, let's talk a little bit about that. First of all, vectors of attack. We have 3 basic vectors of attack. And again, I'm just trying to go through this real quickly. I'll answer questions at the end of this if anyone has any. We have 3 basic vectors of attack. We have internal vector, okay? We have external vector, and we have a code failure. Internal failure is simple, improper internal security policies, letting people phish you, giving passwords out to anybody who asks for them. External failure, poor documentation, documenting things that you're not supposed to, having poor endpoints. Okay, not meeting your system traffic requirements. If you have 100,000 users and you only prepare for 5, when you get that 100,000, your whole system's going down, and you can have exposed endpoints that really you don't want exposed. Code failure, obviously, same thing there. Very self-explanatory. Here's some real life examples, okay? These are some pretty big things, so I want you to pay attention to this. In 2011, Secure ID was leaked, and some of the biggest corporations and governmental agencies had their systems released. US Defense, Lockheed Martin, huge company, made the U2 gigantic, everything leaked. BBC was DDoS with 602 gigabit per second traffic. I don't know if you can really understand how big that is. If anyone does network loading, that is a ridiculous amount of traffic, and it's only going to get worse. Code failure, Heartbleed, enough said. Everyone is familiar with that very big security issue from a merged source code contribution. So how do we secure this? You need to understand principles of security. CIA, anyone who's ever done security will know this: confidentiality, integrity, availability. Make sure information that is confidential remains confidential. Make sure the information that you have is not changed by people who should not have that information changed. Make sure that information is available to all people who need it available. You can do that via a wide variety of methods. This is from an article I've done with Nordic APIs. You can actually find it on my author page. Authentication, authorization, federation, delegation, 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, okay? This is what's gonna save you. Time and time again, you do this properly, 9 times out of 10, you're not gonna have a problem. You do any single one of these things properly, and I guarantee you, people like me, without the morality of me, are gonna go straight into your systems, and they're gonna take advantage of that, okay? Real fast, preventing and fixing code issues, constantly check your code through development, production, and iteration. Check, 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 check. The other day, I walked outside of the house that I have in Stockholm, and thought the door was locked, wasn't. Went inside, my wife left on the burner. Okay? Check. Something as simple as that. I could have burned down someone's house. That's their livelihood. Okay? Same thing with your API. Check your code every single time you make an issue, every single push. Okay? So again, I went through this real fast. I'm just gonna, go through this last part, putting in a whole bunch of stuff. Fix your external vulnerabilities, think like a criminal, and finally balance your reward and risk. Does your API really need the services you're putting in it? Do you really need to store credit card payments when you have a free-to-play game? Do you really need to do these things, okay? And I want to leave you with that concept. You need to think as if you are always going to be attacked, because fundamentally, you are. And you are principally responsible for your users. So please take responsibility for that. And that's it.